That's a very nice video and very nice introduction. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah. And we can stop the video now, actually, I think, and then we can go back to your slides. There you go. There you go. And we have, right now, we have about 20 people, and we are right now just coming to the limit, which is 1:05 p.m. We are actually 1:04. I'll start with the kind a soft introduction. So we are trying something new this time. We are trying to incorporate a video with a dual performance, and the dual performance today is 2 stars. One of them sitting in Switzerland. This is Stefan Suter, who looks after Holmusk Europe, and then we have Eason, who's sitting in Shanghai. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. It's a very topical subject, by the way, that we want to talk about today, which is real-world evidence platform, and especially when it comes to mental health. Now, mental health with COVID especially has been very much in the news. So we'd like to hear more about how Holmusk is making life easier for a lot of people. Stefan is an old campaigner. I don't want to say, Stefan, how long you've been in the business, but not as long as I have been. So, but long enough in different markets, and also in Singapore and Europe. And you started then Holmusk in Europe a couple of years ago. And Eason is, as I said, is based in Shanghai. And Eason, you have been with the company now also about 1 year, 2 years?
Yeah, more than 2 years.
More than 2 years, okay. So, gentlemen, over to you. Stefan and Eason, the floor is yours. Take us away.
Excellent. Thank you, Salman, for this kind intro and for giving us the opportunity here to present. The intention really of today is to have a discussion rather than a one-way presentation. But I think as per your guidance, we probably spent the first 20, 30 minutes with a few slides, presentation, and then we wanna have a discussion with all of you. The intention really is to look at psychiatry specifically, and that's part of it because of COVID. I think it has accelerated and has come more to the forefront, and the awareness has risen for mental health in general. And I think that's why I think it's a very timely topic. On the side of that, we want to talk about real-world evidence generation, what the technology has brought in terms of advancements to make better use of real-world data and real-world evidence maybe than 10 years back. And the combination of the two is particularly interesting because psychiatry have some very specific problems to solve and to deal with if we talk about not only real-world evidence in general, if we talk about RCTs, randomized clinical trials, or evidence generation in general. And we want to as well give a spotlight to that. Yeah, I think we start on an overall introduction to Holmusk, real-world evidence, and then I think we talk a little bit about Europe, and we talk then as well about Asia and China, and that's why it's great to have Eason with us. I believe even in the back we have Eva Bischoff somewhere. She's an advisor to Holmusk for probably 3 years, I would say. And if she's around, I invite her to jump in as well, maybe in answering questions or adding to the discussion.
So, and I've just put a note, by the way. Thank you so much, Stefan, for the introduction. I put a note in the chat box that please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat box, and we will address all of them at the end. It's best to do it that way rather than interrupting the flow of the presentation, if that's okay with everybody.
As we go with your guidance. Great. So let me start off here and try to move the slides, which I thought that's going to work here. Here we go. So basically, mental health has become into the forefront, and I think we are using here behavioral health as an equivalent term to mental health. I think behavioral health may be more the US expression. I think in Europe we are tending towards using mental health more often. I think it's becoming clear it's a growing burden to society, not only because of COVID, but certainly has become more pronounced due to that. I want to, in my mind, what bothers me the most is actually the point lower left, the poor outcome, what we are still faced with across many mental health areas, as well in psychiatry. We don't have an Alzheimer's treatment, despite Biogen's advancements here, which we don't know exactly where this will take us. But really what that bothers me a lot, that even though we have spent decades of scientific research, there is no real good outcome that we can rely on, and real drugs that we can rely on in many of the areas of mental health. Particularly if you compare it to other disease areas like oncology or like rheumatology, where we have seen a lot of biologics and a lot of gene therapies that has brought a lot of advancements. We haven't had that leap in psychiatry and mental health, and I think that's why we are very keen to make a difference in that space and use modern technology to actually accelerate that drug development and offer real helpful treatments for people in need. If we think about the challenges, and I think here we are talking in particular about the challenges in psychiatry and later on a little bit about real world evidence, but if we focus about psychiatry, one of the big issues is that there is no standard assessment tool. If a patient comes in with some challenges, whether it's depression, whether it's schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, there are no clear standards that will be adhered to, either in the diagnosis nor in the treatment. And what that means at the end, there is a lot of off-label use, drugs, different therapies and psychotherapies are used. And since we cannot really identify the start point, it's as well difficult to identify the outcome and what the treatment maybe has helped. Another challenge is that if we think about clinical trials, because of unclear endpoints in studies and not globally recognized standards, it's as well a little bit unclear what to measure and how to interpret the results, which is hindering some of very clear-cut development in the mental health drug development pipeline. And I think last point as well, there is no biomarker today established. There is no such thing as a lab test to test your depression, right? That's not there. And what we rely on heavily is on physician notes. The physician would describe a patient as he presents today, and based on that, we gather insights that will be usually in free text. And specific technology needs to be used to then translate this free text into quantifiable insights and quantifiable outcomes that can be actioned up. I think these are maybe to set up the scene a little bit, the challenges what we are faced with in the psychiatry domain, mental health domain in broader terms. I'm talking a little bit more about psychiatry because that's where our key data asset is focused on, and that's why we oftentimes then go into the psychiatry as a subset of the mental health space. What has changed over the last decade or so, or last 5 years, is the technical advancements in computer science. So what we have as options today available in terms of machine learning, natural language processing, different types of IA models has advanced and significantly accelerated the opportunities that we have to analyze data and model data to tease out the right outcomes. Particularly what we are using a lot is natural language processing at Holmusk. Same goes then with overall digital health, digital therapeutics, which are making a good stride into the market, and an overall shift where evidence is becoming more important, and the value a certain product brings, which poses which brings back the question: how do we measure outcomes, and how can we reliably measure that? And certainly the digital tools and patient-reported outcomes will play an important role in the mental health and psychiatry area. So I think the time is really now to change the paradigm and make a big leap for mental health. If we step back again and talk more about real-world data in general, I think that's the other aspect where Holmusk is specializing in. So real-world evidence has its own particularities. What is it? I think there are as well, maybe there is no one definition, but I think in our case, what we believe definition is, it's about data that has been generated in a routine clinical setting. And that can be electronic health records. That's where we base our analysis most of the time on. But then our claims data, there are patient-reported outcomes, surveys. More and more we see these apps which are carried by patient, and the remote monitoring elements that come in. So I think all these are, in our terminology, considered real-world data. And Holmusk is specializing on one hand to actually integrate different data types onto one platform, and able to interpret these different data types on a common denominator. I think that's one of the strengths. And obviously that's now not applicable to psychiatry or mental health, but I think real-world evidence is highly on the topic at the FDA, at EMA, within payers, NHS or NICE, I should say. NICE has released standards on how they want to consider real-world data to assess the effectiveness and efficacy of products. Even IQWiC is talking about use of real-world data, which I think is maybe one of the more conservative payers from my perspective, from what we have seen in the past. But there is no doubt that people see the value of real-world data, particularly because it widens the range of what patients and what data we're going to capture. Right? I think it's not, nobody would say we should only do real-world data and real-world evidence. We are saying basically to improve or to interpret the data that are captured in clinical randomized trials, real-world evidence is a great opportunity as an add-on to either define clinical trials and define inclusion-exclusion criteria, look at likely responder patients, but then as well, once products are in the market, to actually see how they perform in real life, where we have a much broader set of patients which will be exposed to these medications. I think with that, that's kind of an intro to real-world data and psychiatry, mental health. Now I would move into what is Holmusk doing in that space. And I think we are offering 3 elements all out of one hand. And I think that's the strength of Holmusk, that we have cross-functional teams, well-versed in engineering, IT engineering, software engineering, where we develop our own digital tools. We have our own real-world data set, which is called NeuroBlue. We talk a little bit more about that, which makes us immediately, which makes data immediately accessible. We know the data inside out and can therefore not losing time in curating data and making them analyzable. It's basically ready-made, and we can jump into insights generation and trial research activities. And the third element, I think, goes along with that. We have about 37 data scientists which drive our analytics engine and analytics statistical models, which are high-end models using, for example, natural language processing as a key feature, and being able to look at this complexity of real-world data, where we have a lot of missing data, we have a lot of not clean data, messy data. Some people are referring to that. That needs specific technologies and techniques to actually deal with this heterogeneity of data and missing data elements, as well as different timelines where certain tests have been made and so on. So that needs specific requirements, and I think that's what Holmusk is specializing in. And the same then with the specificities around psychiatry, what we have touched before in terms of no biomarkers really to assess. These are really the three elements, I think, which makes Holmusk, I think, a standout company. And let's talk a little bit more about, in broader terms, what is Holmusk, who we are. We are 6 years old now. We have Optum and Health Catalyst as the key, the leaders for our Series A round, which happened about 2 years back, if I remember right, 1.5 years back. We are now at Series B. We have offices across the globe. In Asia is our headquarters is in Singapore, and then we have offices in Europe and US, and just opened the second headquarters in New York a couple of months back. We have grown from about 40 to 140 people over the last 12 months. During the pandemic, I think that's quite an achievement as well in terms of how you recruit people without seeing them. So many people working for Holmusk have never seen somebody from Holmusk in flesh and blood, right? That's quite interesting, but it works. We were recognized by World Economic Forum as Tech Pioneer 2019 for our ability to work in real-world data at scale. We are part of JLabs with Johnson & Johnson in New York and Shanghai. Our main partners are three groups. One is pharma, clearly our lead group, where we provide research for them. Then we have payers and providers. I think the providers more on the academic side, to advance our own capabilities and add to the body of evidence in the psychiatry space. And with payers, we are having a number of partnerships to see how healthcare system can evolve and how we can support clinical decision making or decision making in terms of which therapies are useful or not useful. Next topic is to give you a quick insight about our real-world evidence data set, NeuroBlue, and I'm aware of time is moving, so I maybe don't spend too much time on that. But overall, I think that's our core asset at Holmusk. Is NeuroBlue is a data set which originally was generated or started by Duke University. We have taken that on board about 4 years back, and since then we're heavily investing in curating the data, making it analyzable, and you can see we have at the moment something over 500,000 patients collected over 20 years in the psychiatry space, substance-related disorders, and then you see MDD, bipolar, ADHD, so there is schizophrenia. That's all where we have a relatively good cohort of patients. But more importantly is the data which is available. because it was introduced by Duke University, they had already from day one a research idea in mind, and that means they have mandated certain fields. For example, they have mandated the CGI score. That's the Global Cognitive Impression Scale, which is a rating 1 to 7, how severe is a certain patient presenting, and that's a very important, very powerful measure, because at each visit this data is collected. So it is allowed us to make predictions about patient behavior, patient development, disease progression for cohorts and individual patients. Of course, we're capturing the disease, the diagnosis, the pharmacotherapy, and that has been prescribed, emergency department visits in outpatients. So I think that's the kind of the standard. The CGIS really stands out here as one element. The other element which is outstanding are symptoms. We have applied natural language processing elements for about over 300 labels that generate symptoms or assess symptoms that patients were faced with and were recorded, which now allows a kind of a phenotyping of patients. So we are not relying on the disease, the diagnosis codes, which are, as we all know, oftentimes a little bit misleading or can be misleading, but we can do much more deeper analysis on the symptomology of patients. And part of the symptomology or extended symptomology will be stress factors that the patients may be exposed to. That can be financial stress or stress at home, housing, family history. That's as well captured in the data set and fully analyzable, fully quantified and fully analyzable, which again allows this much more thorough and much more deeper analysis on the phenotyping of the patients rather than going by indication and diagnosis only. The platform is fully web-based, fully powered with all analytics engines, so you can basically immediately access the data yourself, even if you wanna get an access code license and start your research. A lot of visualization and cohort builders and very fancy tool. I mean, I'm always impressed on how quickly this builds up and performs. I would have another slide here, but I leave that for later. That it talks a little bit more about the NLP algorithm. We have published that, so everybody who is interested, I'm happy to send the paper. You can see here on the left-hand side. You can as well download it yourself. I think we have talked about already commercial use and R&D use of real-world data in pharma. I think I skip that for now. But certainly, as we were saying before, there is a growing demand in using real-world data to define clinical programs, define trial design, as well as then monitoring real-world effects of treatments. If we think about Holmusk in general, this is a US map, so it's a little bit US focused, this map, despite we're talking here about Europe and China, but I think the key message is here on the right-hand side, on the data extrapolation side. We are at the moment somewhere 500,000 patients. By end of the year, because of the existing contracts, we will already cross the 1 million mark of patients of lives covered. And from 2022, we'll still be heavily focused on the US, but then from 23 to onwards, we want to expand aggressively in Europe and Asia, particularly as well in China on data assets and expanding the NeuroBlue platform, which today is a US-focused, a US-only data set into an international data set. So stay tuned for some time and that will become international. That's one of our, I skip this for now, or I summarize this at the end. I talked about Series B already, where we are, that's our next big milestone for the company. we are expecting about 150 million. That will give room for one major acquisition and for an expansion across the globe. Particularly, I think Asia, Europe has some things to add here. Otsuka, we have a partnership with them for 3 years now to drive together new insights and as well as use of real-world data in the psychiatry area. Maybe I can summarize here a few elements and then hand over to Eason. Having a European focus and as the head of Europe, that's obviously where my heart and most of my time is spent. We have two strategies, I think, here to mention. One is we are obviously a real-world data provider for pharma companies, and since most of the pharma companies in Europe, they would not really want US data, but they want to have European data. Because of that, we have a network of data partners, and that's basically covering all major European markets. That's for example, a claims data provider in Germany. We are working with Sechedim, well known, who has great data in France, Spain, UK, Italy. We have an EHR partner in the UK. We have two partners in Switzerland, University of Zurich in particular. We are partnering with Charité. You have maybe seen the announcement that came out on Tuesday. So really the strategy here is to partner with data providers or with providers to then analyze, do research on behalf of pharma on these data sets. So I think that's one part of the European strategy. The other part of the European strategy is actually to ingrain in health systems and make a difference in health systems. And I think here NHS and MAST, which the slide was before, and you can read it later on. That's a predictive tool that runs in, at the moment, six NHS mental health trusts, which is designed to predict crises of patients and assess the complexity of patients, which then can generate warnings when to engage a patient, as well as caseload allocation across the teams. That's running very successfully. We have actually started rolling out in March this year with the first two trusts, and we are now already at 6, the 7th to be signed anytime. We have another roughly 45 trusts, mental health trusts, that can be engaged. With that, I think that was around Europe, and now over to you, Eason. Sorry for taking a little bit more time than expected.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, because I'm in China, just to make sure like my network is working. So thank you, Stefan, for the great overview of Holmusk itself. So my name is Eason. I'm covering the BD efforts and also the operations for our China entity. So Holmusk, as you guys see, is such an international company, and we have offices across the world. So we decided to enter China in 2019 with the open of the J Labs in Shanghai. So I think J Labs in Shanghai is probably the largest J Labs across the world. So we are fortunate enough to be the first batch of the residents in J Labs. I think then we actually had a quite challenging and rewarding journey along the way. So we participate in the first batch of the Merck Accelerator program in China, and we will be able to sign the AIA partnerships within the Hong Kong group office. I think we will be able to present Holmusk the AD model on the DIA hosted in China last year. I think we also launched our first China projects on the MDD side with the top leading hospitals in China called Beijing Anding Hospitals. I think, and then this year we signed a contract with Eason China to launch the first prospective study on the digital solutions. Next slide, please. So as you guys may know, I think China is such a unique or challenging market to be in. So I think from a government point of view, Healthy China 2030 plan is actually, our strategy or our mission and our focus in mental health is fully aligned first with the I would say the central government's ambition to improve health of the people living in China. Especially, I think the mental health is the first time being mentioned in the plan. It's already been lifted up to become a core health, I would say, subsectors that the government is looking after recently. I think before we officially enter China, we already signed MOU with J&J, with Eason, to help them to develop digital mental health strategy in China. Next slide, please. So just a quick glance of the China side. We currently have one depression projects going on. I think we are, whenever I entered China market, and then I'm the first employee in China, so we actually grew from 1 to 10 right now, and then for the next 1 and 2 years, we are planning to grow to 40 members. Yeah, and then our current office is in the J Labs. I think we have been won several awards within China, including the Merck one, and then there's also the Ping An Cloud Accelerator. I think there's many other awards. Next slide, please. So just I'll spend like 1 or 2 minutes to covering what we are doing currently in China. So we are launching 150 prospective studies on the MDD patients. So basically, we are integrating the digital, we call the electronic patient report outcome, with the EHR we normally see in the hospitals. So we kind of trying to bridge the gap of trying to make it a full circle of the information flow, both in the clinic and also outside the clinical settings. So we develop our own apps called mConnect. Next slide, please. So our apps actually have 2 interfaces. One is for the patients, and one dashboard is for the doctors or for the physicians. So actually, whenever the patient step outside of the clinical settings, and then he or she will be prescribed to this kind of apps, which was only for this study, I think, and then they can actually track or submit their quiz, which is like we use PHQ-9, and then also we use WSAS to track them on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And then whenever the patient report their symptoms and then their self-test scores in the apps, I think, and then the information flow will eventually flow back to the dashboard. So whenever the patients revisit the hospitals or revisit the doctor, probably a month later or 2 months later, the doctor can easily open up the dashboard to see that specific patients, what's his or her food patient journey. Is he really taking the medicine? Is he really what's the actual symptoms or side effects he's suffering or she's suffering. So to actually give the doctor a holistic view, or I would say the comprehensive journey of that specific patient, which is can help the doctor to actually to better understand the patients and then to do a more precise, I would say, diagnosis and also the prescriptions. So this project is currently under the phase 1, which is more like towards a feasibility study. And then we are planning to launch a phase 2 or phase 3 in probably right after this phase 1 study to implement more features. We are planning to implement more AI predicting features as reserved for the later stages. Yeah. So next slide, please. I think I will, that's a really quick overview of what we are currently doing in China. I'll turn back to Stefan to continue the introduction. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are at the end of the presentation with that. I just thought I add this slide to everybody who is interested. Please join us at ISPOR in December 2nd at 4 p.m. We have a great panel. We are running around real world data in the mental health space. We are talking much more about this natural language processing thing. And we have Professor Christoph Corell, who will chair the session from Charité in Berlin. So certainly whoever is interested, I think I can just recommend that. We have Eva there as well. We have Dr. Ashwin Patel, who is he's at King's College, but he's as well at Holmusk, leading our scientific affairs. And we have Joydeep Sarkar, who is the father of our analytics portfolio and our analytics engine. So certainly recommend it to join in there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you so much. Do you want to show the last slide with do you have your contact details there in case people want to get in touch with you? Oh, well, who was that, by the way, on the Everest?
That's Paul Wallin. He's a personal friend of our CEO, Naval Roy, and he's a climber. He has climbed, I don't know how many of the 8,000 meter mountains. He was on the Matterhorn this year, and he usually carries a flag for Holmusk on the top of the peak.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was actually interesting. And as obviously you are covering new terrain, new areas, and there's a number of questions in the chat box that I'd just like to kind of kick off with a couple of perhaps slightly provocative questions.